Good evening. I'd like to call to order the regular Housing and Redevelopment Authority meeting for the City of Richfield. It's September 19th and 7 p.m. Our first order of business is the open forum. Each speaker is to keep their comment period to 3 minutes to allow sufficient time for others. Comments are to be an opportunity to address the HRA. Please refer to the HRA Agenda and Minutes webpage for additional ways to submit comments. You may also call 612-861-9764 or email ldubis@richfieldmin.gov with questions. If you would like to call into open forum right now, you can call in by dialing 1-415-655-0001 and use the webinar access code 2458-864-8733, and the password is 1234. So that is up on the screen if you are watching at home, and we'll pause for a moment to see if anyone calls in. I'm not seeing anyone in the audience that wishes to speak. Executive Director Palman, did anyone send any comments earlier?
Chair Supple, we did not receive any comments.
Okay. And we're refreshing the online meeting. For those of you at home, we now have a way so that we can see the online call-ins. So thank you to the tech department for setting that up. All right, it looks like that there's no one calling in at the moment. If they do call in, we can always come back to them. So moving on, we have approval of the minutes of the regular Housing and Redevelopment Authority meeting of August 15th, 2022.
So moved.
All right, it's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes. Are there any questions, comments, concerns? All right, all in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, we've approved the minutes. We're going to have a presentation, and then after that, we'll approve the agenda and move on with that. So our presentation is the consideration of the acceptance of the management review and analysis of TIF Increment Financing Districts report, and I'll turn it over to Executive Director Palman. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Supple, members of the board. So typically at our September meeting, we present the tax increment financing district status report for the year. This year, however, we recommended and the HRA approved the preparation of a more robust management review and analysis report. And so tonight, Senior Municipal Advisor Rebecca Kurtz from Ellers is going to walk the board through that report and the more detailed information that it provides to us and helps us to manage our TIF districts going forward. So I'll turn it over to Rebecca.
Thank you, Melissa. Again, Rebecca Kurtz from Ellers. I'm happy to be here this evening. And what I'm going to walk through is an overview of the executive summary that you received. It's hot off the press from discussions with staff and my coworkers. As Melissa mentioned, it's been a deep dive into the TIF districts and is providing a more robust look that is going to be hopefully beneficial not only to you as HRA board members, but also to the staff as we move forward in light of some legislative changes that we have seen, and then in light of some of the staff transitions that have happened or are in the process of happening too. So the purpose of a TIF management plan is really fourfold. It is looking at a chance to review all of the existing TIF districts and look at opportunities that may be coming forward, not only in the short term, but also long term, but also look for any concerns that we have and give a chance to identify those and do what we can to mitigate any risk that we may have with individual districts, whether it be related to state auditor reporting or shortfalls with budgeting, whatever the case may be. It's a chance to confirm that we are in compliance with requirements per Minnesota statute. It provides that summary to you as the HRA board, again, a more robust look than that TIF status update that historically had been done. And then it also provides details by district for the staff, not only city staff, but HRA staff as we move forward and manage these. I think if we look at two takeaways from the presentation tonight, the first one is your TIF districts continue to be on track and in generally great shape. We are not bringing forward any recommendations for modifications, and we do not see any compliance issues. So that is great news and is continuing, I think, the message that I have been giving to you for 20 some years here. The second finding that we did have is that there are 3 different options for pooling opportunities, and I will go into detail and talk about these 3 options and opportunities as we get into the report here. The city currently has 13 active TIF districts. There, I do want to note 2 of them, which is the 101 66th Street East and the Linview will have their first increment starting in 2023. You may recall that we do have about 5 districts that started from 2020 through 2022. So while we are going to be anticipating some decertification of TIF districts in the very near future here, we also have some new TIF districts coming on that, as we get into this, you will see aren't showing a lot of increment, but partly that is because they are so new that they haven't necessarily even completed the development that we are anticipating. So TIF as a development tool, as I mentioned, we have 13 TIF districts. With the redevelopment efforts that the city and the HRA have undertaken since the beginning of your use in TIF, we have seen some, I would argue, dramatic increases in benefits from using this tool. Overall, development from these TIF districts has increased the market value nearly 400%. You can see to the column on the far right, those percentages generally are ranging from, on those brand new districts that have not completed development, negative. But as you look at the Wood Lake Housing, Lindale Gardens, and really the redevelopment districts in general, we have seen over a 500% increase in market value. Again, as we look at the 2020 1, 2, and 3 TIF districts, those are districts that have been established but are currently under construction or have not been fully assessed with the new market value. So we are showing a negative there as we are looking at where they stand today, but that will change as we move forward and they are fully assessed and put on the tax roll with their new completed market value. Looking at this a little bit differently as we look at the net tax capacity, one of the opportunities that we want to identify is what is going to be coming off or decertified from tax increment districts. And so what you will see as the benefit to the city net tax capacity and your general fund taxes moving forward and help project that. We have been talking about this for some time, but the Lindale Gateway Interchange West District, which is the Best Buy project, and then Richfield Senior Housing, along with the Urban Village TIF District, both decertify in 2025. So you can see on this chart that, again, looking at today as a point in time, we have about 10% of the city's tax base in tax increment financing districts. Taking what we know today and projecting forward, you can see between 25 and 26, there is a fairly significant decrease in that percent of the city's tax base that is in TIF. Based on today's numbers, we go from about 10.7% to about 5.7%. I will say that 5.7 will likely be a little bit higher just because it is very likely we'll be seeing that increase in market values as some of your newer TIF districts start to be fully assessed. But again, you can see that benefit of having the basically Best Buy project, Richfield Senior Housing Project, and Urban Village starting to come off the tax roll. As we compare ourselves to other communities, I would say that it is important to look individually at what your community is and not do great comparisons because there are so many variables. However, I know that the fact of life is that we do like to know how we stand compared to some of our neighbors. So we did look at other communities and look at not only the captured tax capacity as a percent of your tax base, but also looked at how that may play with tax rates for communities and bond ratings. And I think the two takeaways on this are first, Richfield is very comparable with similar and surrounding communities. We spoke with staff and put in some communities that we know you consider yourself or compare yourself to, and then also look at, again, Wayzata, which you may not immediately think of as a comparison, but it is a AAA rated community. And from the finance side, I know that is always a goal of communities of what can we do to get to that AAA rating. Again, you can see that Richfield is kind of in the middle there generally, with communities with 10% of your tax base in tax increment districts. The AA plus rating is on the higher end of what we are seeing ratings in the metro area. And then the other point I want to make as a takeaway is that captured net tax capacity doesn't necessarily correlate with either your tax rate or your bond rating. So while I know there are sometimes discussions and concerns about that, especially as communities start to go out for debt issuance on, what does it mean if we have 10% of our tax base in TIF districts? That doesn't seem to be a concern as we look at other communities and compare ourselves. The other point I would make is that by using tax increment and having the success that you have had as a community, and again, looking at some of those prior slides where we've seen that increase in tax base due to the tax increment projects that the community has brought forward, that is helping that reinvestment and expansion of your tax base, and again, just keeping up with your redevelopment efforts, and rating agencies do see that as a positive for communities. We have talked about that impact of the decertified district, specifically looking at that Lindale Gateway West, or Lindale Gateway and Interchange West, as that is a very significant part of the tax increment tax capacity just due to the size of the Best Buy project. You will see again when that is decertified in 2026, we are looking at or estimating an increase in the tax capacity of roughly 2.6 million. If we take that tax capacity and translate that into tax dollars for only the city of Richfield, again using that tax capacity and the 2022 tax rate, we would estimate that would be about $1.45 million in new tax revenue for the city only, and that does not account for the school district or the county portion of that. So again, creating a fairly significant opportunity for the city at the point when that district is decertified at the end of 25, hitting the tax roll for calendar year 2026. Projecting forward, you can also see that as the City Bella and the Lindale Gateway TIF districts are decertified in 2030 and 2031, there also will be an additional opportunity of an additional tax capacity of roughly just under 305,000 for the Lindale Gateway West. That may be better known by the Kensington project where there's some housing and like a Potbelly and a Noodles and Starbucks. And then also the City Bella project in 2031. At this point, we're estimating just under 662,000 addition in your tax base, again in 2031. With that, the one note I do want to make is that for those of you who have seen me stand up here many years prior to this year, there is a minimum assessment agreement tied with the Best Buy project or the Best Buy headquarters. That has a minimum market value of $118.5 million, and that is going to be in place through tax year 2025 or the decertification of the TIF district. The reason for that is there are general obligation bonds outstanding with that district, and it was put in place to provide some security that regardless of what the future may hold, there would be sufficient increment to make those bond payments so the city would not be required to levy for the bond payments associated with that project. Projecting forward, we have assumed that the market value would remain constant at that 118.5 million. However, at the time when that TIF district is decertified, that assessment agreement will go away, and so there is question and risk on what will happen or how that will be valued, or maybe how Best Buy will respond and if they will look to work with the county to lower that. We aren't sure what that's going to hold, but it is something at least we wanted to make you aware of, that there is some question on that in the future. With the obligations that the HRA has associated with the TIF district, there are really three buckets of obligations. The first one is general obligation tax increment financing bonds. The HRA and city do have two TIF bonds. One is, again, connected to the Best Buy project. The second one is connected to the Kensington TIF district. You will see that the 2010B bonds with the Best Buy project will mature in February of 24, so we only have a couple of years left on that. The 2012 bonds are connected with the Kensington project, and those will mature and be paid in full in February of 2025. So both of those will be paid in full prior to decertification of each of those TIF districts. The second type of obligation that the HRA has is a pay-as-you-go note, and a majority of the obligations that you have with other parties are a pay-as-you-go note. Again, I know that you have heard me say this, but for those that may be listening on TV, a pay-as-you-go note means that ultimately the developer is the one who is going to assume the risk for that. They finance the project up front, and then after the project is completed and they have met the requirements that are outlined in the agreement, the HRA issues them an obligation or a note, and that note is paid off solely from the increment that is generated from that project. So to the extent that the project is completed as planned, valued as planned, and taxes are paid as planned, it is likely that they will be paid in full. However, to the extent that anything unexpected happens or the project is not completed and valued as we estimate, the developer is the one that is going to assume the risk. At the decertification of, or at the time of decertification of the TIF district, if that obligation is not paid in full, the HRA and the city are not responsible to make any shortfall payment. Again, that is a risk that the developer takes. The third and final type of obligation the HRA has are interfund loans, and these are for the most part loans that are typically set up early in a project to help cover administrative costs, costs for maybe the HRA's contribution for a project, and on these the risk is on the city or the HRA. We typically pay these with administration fees that the HRA can collect through TIF or factor in payment when we are negotiating a project, but ultimately, if something unexpected happens, the risk is on the city. There is only one interfund loan I want to call out, and it is one that is familiar with the Kensington project or the Lindale Gateway West TIF District. There is an interfund loan of about $1,001,001 and $619,000. Those two loans will continue to have payments made on them as we move forward until decertification of the TIF district. But the interfund loans connected with the Lindale Gateway District are not, it is very unlikely that they will be paid in full. Again, if we look back to the time when that district was established, that was a project that was important to the HRA and council at that point in time. And so there was a chance at that point that they would not be paid in full, and that was a risk that the bodies decided to take on at that point in time. So we have never been in a position where we expected them to be paid in full, and that does continue. I mentioned that one of the benefits of this tax increment financial management plan was to look at opportunities that the HRA could consider. And pooling is one of those opportunities. Generally, pooling is identified as unobligated TIF that can be used to redevelop sites or build affordable housing that is not located in a TIF district. So it is that percent of increment that can be spent outside the boundaries of each of those 13 TIF districts. As we looked at this opportunity, we identified 3 districts that have funds that could be available through pooling: the Lindale Gateway Interchange West, the Urban Village, and the City Bella TIF district. Again, as we looked and identified these, the HRA will continue to meet the obligations per the development agreement to the developers. So this is not going to impact the TIF notes that are outstanding that we are paying on for the developer, but it is additional increment that is available for the HRA. Right now, there are 3 different pooling options that are available. You may recall that the HRA and city went to the legislature last year and did receive special legislation to allow 10% pooling to go to the Housing Trust Fund. In addition, the legislature passed general temporary legislation for what they call spending plans. With that, it is an opportunity for a defined period of time where HRAs, EDAs, and cities could make some, set up a spending plan and then have that unobligated TIF be used in a much more flexible way than what typical TIF law allows for. And then finally, there is that what we'll call regular pooling. With your redevelopment districts, you may recall the HRA continues to take 10% for administrative. That is a maximum that you are allowed to take under Minnesota statute. And then depending on the deal that is negotiated and the terms in the development agreement, there are some districts where you have obtained or retained an additional 15%. And so equaling that 25% for regular pooling that again would typically need to be used for redevelopment sites and projects that qualify for redevelopment. As we looked at these 3 pots of money or these 3 opportunities and tried to identify how we wanted to set up an approach and prioritize, after discussions with staff, we looked at a waterfall approach to help prioritize those opportunities. Looking at using first as a top priority the 10% pooling to the Housing Trust Fund. From there, then we looked at the opportunity for creating a spending plan. That was set as a number 2 priority, in part due to just the flexibility that will allow if you decide to move forward with that. And then finally, the 25% regular pooling for redevelopment, which is what you are currently doing and would be able to continue to do per the general or TIF law.
We have a question.
Yes.
Can you explain why I would think the spending plan would be first on the waterfall just because of the flexibility and then the time box nature that has? So why would that not be first? Or can you explain that a little bit?
Thank you, and that's a great question. I will say we had a lot of discussion with my coworkers and staff on how to prioritize that. And part of that in the short term, well, and I will actually jump to the next slide here to help walk through that. So this 10% to the Housing Trust Fund was identified at this point in time as a top priority to take that additional 10% for affordable housing, partly because there are currently estimated about $750,000 in projects that have been identified as projects that are anticipated to be coming forward in the near future. And I don't want to speak to specifically what near future is, but staff has been in discussion regarding some projects. So with the funds that are available, we are proposing, and again, I think this is a discussion that if there is additional direction and feedback, we surely can review that because the final commitment has not been made. But the discussion was to take about $250,000 from each of those 3 TIF districts, again totaling $750,000 specifically for that housing trust fund and to accommodate those future projects. One thing I want to note with that is those funds are available now, and so they could be transferred anytime now through December of 2026, which is the statutory limit on that legislation.
As a follow-up question to that, if the districts get decertified before that legislative time, you have to spend it before they're decertified, correct? Or
with the with the housing trust fund, you are able that creates a new fund and separate fund. I guess I'll land on that term. And you do not have the same requirements as with the general TIF law or the 25% pooling. It is going to allocate it toward those specific housing projects.
So what I'm trying to get at is the timing of it. So I know it can be transferred over to there. Does it have to be spent before the district is decertified, or it has to be transferred?
Once it is transferred into that fund, you could spend it at any point in the future. It does not have that same spending deadline as if it were regular pooling in the TIF district. And so you would have additional time to spend those funds.
But can it be transferred? Do you have to have a specific use you're transferring it for? Or just transfer it in general to be used in the housing trust fund?
I don't believe it. The project does not have to be identified in order to transfer it.
So we can transfer it over, and then it's no longer tied to a TIF district. Is what?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
And then it can be spent at any point per the requirements of the housing trust fund that was set up. And again, we have until December of 2026 to make those transfers.
Thank you. That helps.
I will say with the numbers that I am outlining for all of these pooling options, they are the discussions that we had with staff and proposed transfers. But again, as this evolves over time, in a year from now, if we see different needs, we always can revisit to update and see what changes may need to be made based on projects that are coming forward and funds that may be available through the different TIF districts.
Chair Supple, if we, I think it might be helpful if I walk you through staff's rationale, but I think that it would be most beneficial if Rebecca can go through what we've landed on first, and then I can come back and tell you how we got there. And I think that that will address time limits. It will address how we landed on 750, why the waterfall looks like it does. But I think it'll make more sense if we get through the 3 buckets first.
All right, thank you.
The second option, as alluded to, is the temporary spending authority that is a temporary change in TIF statute for all communities throughout the state. And as mentioned, it does provide the greatest flexibility. Under this temporary spending authority, you have the ability to use unobligated tax increment to help stimulate private development. That means one of the requirements is it does need to go to a third party or private party. So the HRA could not use this authority and these funds for purchasing land that the HRA wants to acquire. With this authority, a spending plan needs to be adopted by the end of this year, and the funds need to be transferred into that new fund for the spending plan. However, you as the HRA have through December 31st of 2025 in order to actually spend those funds. In the event that you do not spend all of those funds by the December 25 deadline, then those funds do go back into the TIF district they were transferred from. So they would go back into the urban village, the Interchange West Lindale Gateway, and or the City Bella TIF district as they originally came out of. You can see on this chart that we are anticipating at the end we would have roughly 6.3 million or just over 6.3 million available for a spending plan with this. Again, a majority of that coming from the Interchange West Lindale Gateway TIF district. With this, we have looked at the 21 cash balance. We have estimated what we anticipate to be there at the end of 2022, factoring in that those payments, we receive taxes in 22, but there will be a pay-as-you-go payment on those districts in February of 23. We have again assumed that the HRA would continue to take that 10% for the Housing Trust Fund or the $250,000 that was identified on the prior slide, and then looking at the available total at about 6.3 million. Finally, the quote regular pooling, or that 25%, is, as I mentioned, what the HRA has historically done with these 3 TIF districts, and that is looking at that 25% is made up of the 10% for administration, along with an additional 15%. These funds need to be spent within the Richfield redevelopment project area. However, that project area is coterminous with your city limits, so we don't have any concerns with that. As I mentioned, it includes your admin that you have been taking for up to 10%. These funds must meet the eligible TIF criteria for redevelopment district. And so what that means is that it has to be used on something that is causing a site or a parcel to qualify for redevelopment. So blight, substandard buildings, etc. And then also a note on this, while we have identified these 3 TIF districts that have the most opportunity, other TIF districts can participate, and this is something that we continue to monitor every time the HRA establishes a new TIF district, and to the extent that there are opportunities, we bring that forward and try to include that. So with time, this would be something that we could see evolve and different TIF districts contributing as they start to generate increment. With this, as we look and project forward from this year to 2030, when the City Bella TIF district will be decertified, we are estimating over that roughly 8-year term an opportunity of about $3.4 million. Another opportunity that we did identify as part of the management plan was connected with the housing TIF districts. So we have been talking about the redevelopment TIF districts. Now we're going to switch over for your housing TIF districts and some opportunities with affordable housing. Per TIF statute, you can see the criteria, which is the minimum criteria that is required in order to establish a housing TIF district with income limits, and then also for rental projects that the rent requirements or the income limits need to remain for the life of the TIF district. Owner occupied requirements for income only qualify for the first available or the first purchaser. With this, I will note that depending on the TIF district that has been established, as you are aware, we have had some opportunities where we have had deeper affordability than this minimum, and that always is an opportunity that the HRA has to negotiate as part of the agreement, and it is something that, especially in recent years, we have looked and taken the opportunity to have some deeper affordability with new projects as they've been presented. With this type of district or housing districts, there is no limit on the pooling, so all of those expenses are considered in district, so that pooling within the boundaries of a TIF district doesn't have a limit to use if you're going to do assistance for additional affordable housing. We've identified 2 TIF districts that have potential opportunities. One is the Wood Lake Housing TIF District, where we are estimating roughly $3.8 million that would be available by 2039. In the short term, we are estimating about $150,000 a year that would be available during the term until the pay-as-you-go note is paid off in 2035. And then in those final years, if you chose to keep the TIF district open, we are estimating that there would be an additional roughly $300,000 during those last 4 years if the district was remaining open for the full 26 years. Again, with both of these opportunities, at the time the obligation is paid, you always have the opportunity to either keep the district open or to decertify it and get it on the tax roll to benefit the tax base. The second opportunity that we've identified is the Chamberlain project, which is over off of Richfield Parkway. It is a newer district, so this will likely evolve over time, but we are estimating an opportunity of about $9.3 million by the time the district is decertified in 2045. In the short term, all of the increment is going to pay the obligations that are associated with the district. However, because of the value that we are seeing on that district, we are anticipating that the pay-as-you-go note will be paid in 2036. At that point in time, then we are estimating roughly $850,000 a year that could be available for affordable housing projects until the time the district is decertified. So roughly 9 years of potential increment for affordable housing projects. Again, with that, if you did choose to use either or both of those opportunities, there would need to be that minimum criteria per TIF law, but it would be an opportunity to have deeper affordability possibly also. Other provisions, excess tax increment. With that, I just want to make a note that the districts can only collect what is authorized to be spent in the TIF plan. So as I come before you with new TIF districts in the future and we set budgets, again, those are maximums that are setting the max we could collect. We typically tend to estimate high with the hopes that we are not going to be able, or not going to have to come back to modify those, but also give you the opportunity to maximize the benefit of the tax increment. At this point in time, we are not anticipating that any districts would generate excess increment that would cause concerns with compliance issues. So that is good news for the community. As we talk about compliance, there are two other rules that I just want to highlight. One is what we call the FourYear Rule. And under statute, that means that every parcel that is in a TIF district must have qualifying activity or something happening within 4 years of the district being certified. To the extent that there is not activity, the county then removes that from the TIF district. You always can bring it back into the district if development happens. But as our review, we have not seen any concerns with compliance on that. There are not concerns with districts being knocked down because of inactivity with this. Again, at the very bottom, as we look at the new districts in 2020 and beyond, we have not met that 4-year rule timeline yet, but with the development that is occurring on those, we are not seeing any immediate concern. The second rule that we hear about frequently with tax increment is what we call the 5-year rule. And that means that within 5 years of certification, there must be an obligation or a development agreement entered into, and expenses to be reimbursed through TIF have been expended. And again, as we look at the different steps to be in compliance with the 5-year rule, whether bonds have been issued, parties have been reimbursed, or TIF notes have been issued, we are in compliance, so we do not have any concerns with any of your districts as it relates to that compliance issue. With administrative expenses, I know you've heard me mention this many times, but the statute allows for up to 10% of revenues or expenses depending on the year. So we basically generally say 10% can be retained for admin. With that admin, it includes reimbursement for staff time, legal expenses, expenses like mine. The TIF Management Plan is an eligible admin expense, so you are using some of that for that cost. If there are publication and reporting expenses as you continue to work to be in compliance, those can all be considered admin. Again, staff time should be documented for recommendations through the state auditor so that we are able to tie to that 10%. You are not able to just take a flat 10% off the top of the districts. And finally, that 10% limit is not an annual calculation, but we look at that at the time the district is decertified. So we recognize typically early on in a district that admin may be more than 10%, it may be significantly more, but as long as it is in compliance at the time the district is decertified, you are okay. So findings and recommendations, again, as I started with, all of your districts are on track and in compliance. So again, great news, and definitely a testament to the staff and direction from you as an HRA board that we do not have any concerns with that. We've talked about the spending plan, and if you do decide to move forward with that, whether it be as outlined in this or if there are going to be some addition or some changes, we would need to have that adopted by December of 22, so within the next couple months here. And we would be working with staff to get that completed and then bring that to the council for a public hearing and final approval. So funds could be transferred by the end of the year. With that, we are finally recommending that establishing some separate funds, one for the Housing Trust Fund or that additional 10% tied with your special legislation to assist with affordable housing goals for the community, and then a separate fund for the spending plan, again, single funds for the TIF district, providing that flexibility that if a spending plan funds are not spent by that deadline of December 25, they could go back to the district they were transferred from and be used under just the regular pooling opportunities that present itself with TIF statutes. I've given you a lot of information, so I will pause. We can discuss any questions, but I do want to say, as you move forward, as you look and read the report that was handed, I recognize it's almost 30 pages. Staff and myself are always available to continue to answer questions, have other discussions, and make sure that you are comfortable with the direction as you decide how you want to move forward.
Thank you for that very thorough report. I learned a lot. Are there any questions? I did have one question. So you're saying that we have to adopt a spending plan. Is that like a general outline, or do you need to know specific projects, or how? Can you tell me more about what the spending plan needs to look like?
Absolutely. So the spending plan, if you do decide to move forward with that, is I would say general plan. You would need to identify the TIF districts and the funds that are going to be moved into these funds and used or possibly used through the spending plan authority. We would need to identify types of projects. However, it would not need to be very extremely specific and detailed and identify the projects today. So it could be something, for example, to say to assist with economic development projects, spurred by third-party developers moving forward in the next 2 to 3 years. So you do not have to have a specific project identified in order to make that transfer and adopt a spending plan. In my experience, a lot of the communities that are doing this don't necessarily know what those projects are going to be yet.
Thank you. That's helpful. And then you mentioned economic development. Does this tie in at all with the EDA, or is this totally because part of the HRA? Or is there any interplay with all the TIF?
Okay. With the TIF, because the HRA is the authority for the TIF districts, we bring this report to you as the authority for the TIF districts and the group that oversees and has the obligations associated with each of them. For a spending plan, it would really be a policy decision on how the HRA, the EDA, and all of the bodies work together to identify or fund future projects. From that standpoint, it would not have to be tied directly to the HRA, but you could decide how you wanted to spend those funds.
Thank you. Are there additional questions? Executive Director Palman, did you want to add anything?
Well, thank you, Chair Supple. I think maybe I'll just go through again how we got to the numbers in each of these buckets. And when, Rebecca described this as a waterfall, it is indeed a waterfall. We did start with the Housing Trust Fund. Actually, backing up a second, we first started with the spending plan. We said that's the most flexible tool. We should put everything we can into that most flexible tool. And as that timeline runs out, we should look at moving it into these other funds that have additional time after that. After saying that and looking at our Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which would be getting in that scenario $0, we thought maybe that wasn't, it maybe wasn't going to be politically popular to put $0 in there initially. And we also have commitments coming up that we know about. So we went through our projects. We have already committed $500,000 to between Richfield Flats and the Land Trust. We know that MHFA is possibly coming up with a matching program for which we would need to have dollars in our Affordable Housing Trust Fund. The most we could have in there for the most that we could be matched is $150,000. So now we're at $650,000. And then we thought, let's put an extra $100,000 in there just in case something comes up quickly. We'll have some flexibility immediately. So that's how we arrived at 750. And then we went back and asked Ellers, we said, let's put this money that we know we have committed in development agreements to projects into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund immediately, and then move through the rest of the waterfall. That said, I think my recommendation would be to move funds to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund as we commit them, leave them in that spending plan, and then move them to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund as they're committed. So for instance, if Beacon came in this fall and there was a development agreement and we said, this is the amount that we're going to be putting toward that project, we could move those funds immediately so that we know they're for that project. Otherwise, leave them in the most flexible account. If we get to that deadline, that 12/31/25 deadline, and there's money in there that isn't spent, we can move it back to the districts where it originally was, and then pull the full 10%, if we'd like, into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which doesn't have a deadline for spending. We have a deadline to move it in there, but we don't have a deadline to spend it. So it was really a game of where should we put these now that we think we can maximize our opportunities. So that's how we came up with these numbers.
Thank you. Are there other questions or clarifications? May I ask a procedural question? So on the agenda tonight, we have a motion to, we will have a motion to accept this report. When does the actual spending plan come forward? Is that in upcoming meetings that will look at details of the spending plan?
Yes, Chair Supple, that's a great question. So tonight, what we wanted to do was present this report to you, have you accept it, take it home and digest it a little bit. And then our plan would actually be to come to the HRA and City Council at a joint work session and make sure that everybody felt comfortable with this plan moving forward. And we'd hope to do that next month and then bring a spending plan to you in November. So make sure that everybody is in agreement with this path and have something before you before Thanksgiving.
Thank you. Thank you for the report and all the work that you put into it, and thank you to the staff as well. Are there any additional questions? All right. Would someone like to make the motion to accept the report?
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded to accept the report. Are there any additional comments, questions, or discussion? All right, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, we've accepted the report, and thank you again. That was very helpful, and I appreciate having time to think about it and have time to go over it and before we actually get into a work session. That helps. All right, next we'll move on to approval of the agenda.
I will make the motion to approve the agenda.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the agenda. Are there any changes? All right, then all in favor of approving the agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, we've approved the agenda. Next, we'll move on to the consent calendar. Executive Director Palman.
Thank you, Chair Supple. There are no items on the, I'm sorry. Our one item is on the consent calendar tonight. The consent calendar contains several or just one separate item, which is acted upon by the HRA in one motion. Once the consent calendar has been approved, the individual items and recommended actions have also been approved, and no further HRA action on these items is necessary. Tonight, the only item on your consent calendar is to consider an adjustment to the payment standard for the Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Program. That concludes the consent calendar.
Thank you. Are there any questions?
I will make the motion to move the consent calendar.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to approve the consent calendar. Any questions? All right, seeing no discussion, we'll call the question. All in favor of approving the consent calendar, please say aye.
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 All opposed? All right, we've approved the consent calendar. Moving on to HRA discussion items, are there any things that anybody would like to bring up? I wanted to say kudos to all the Penn Central team that put together Penn Fest, and to Commissioner Hanson, who is here with us, that was part of that. It was an amazing event, and it was just great to see everybody out there and see all the community spirit and all the different things going on. So thank you for that.
Agreed.
Oh, well, thank you. It's a fun event to see come together and see all those people come together and enjoying themselves and, and building that sense of community.
Very cool. And then one other thing I had asked Director Paleman, or Executive Director Paleman, about earlier was, as developments are coming online, neighborhood meetings, and can you say a little bit about what our policy is to encourage developers to have those meetings?
Sure. This is as the projects are getting ready to go under construction? Yes. So we always encourage the developers to reach back out to the community who they have most likely spoken with several months prior as the development was going through its land use approval process. We encourage them to reach out to that group and hold a meeting to let the neighborhood know about construction schedules. We encourage them to provide a direct contact for someone on site because people will often call the city, which is fine. You certainly can call us and we will get in touch with the developer too, but sometimes it's nice to have the number of someone who is physically there on site, who understands exactly what you're talking about. And the developers that we have worked with in the past several years have been very open to us. I know that the Linview project right now, there's an on-site contact there. The Chamberlain project, when that was under construction, because it was so large, they had a monthly newsletter that went out to the neighborhood surrounding. The North Bay project that's getting ready to kick off at 101 66th Street East, that developer will be reaching out to the neighborhood surrounding there in the coming month as soon as they have their scheduling lined up. So if anyone ever has any questions about that, they can always call staff and we can give them an update.
Thank you very much. That was helpful. Any other HRA discussion items? All right, then we'll move on to the Executive Director's report.
Thank you. I just have 2 items. At the last meeting, we approved the HRA and EDA budgets for 2023, and there was a question about the impact on an individual homeowner based on those 4% proposed levy increases. And I wanted to follow up on that. Right now, the average market value of a home in Richfield is up to $308,000. And based on that value, the levy increase would mean an additional 20 cents per homeowner per year. And that divided out is 11 cents contributes to the HRA budget and 9 cents toward the EDA. So that is the impact of that. And going forward, we will include that in the presentation. The other thing I wanted to mention is that we did receive word that MICC's project did not receive their tax credit funding in this cycle. You know, I think we've talked to you about this before, that often these projects take a few rounds of applications to receive funding. We haven't gotten word on Richfield Flats, so as far as we know, they are still being reviewed and up for funding, but MICC did not get it this round.
Thank you. All right, next item on the agenda are claims.
I will move claims.
Second?
It's been moved and seconded to approve the claims. Are there any questions? All right, all in favor of approving the claims, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, we've approved the claims. Thank you all. We've finished all the items on our agenda and we stand adjourned.